Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly Top 3, the top 3 things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of August 1st, 2022. The weekly Top 3 is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:25 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our 3 issues. We post a podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages. Also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly Top 3 also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you also can follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top 3 issues are these. First, we focus on what the money and endorsements are telling us so far about state races in this election cycle. Second, we look at the 5 legislative races we are using as a bellwether and why we have selected them. And third, we explain why we are going to find out something about Alaska's oil future in the next couple of months. And now, let's join Michael.
All right, so number 1 of the weekly top 3, let's get right into it because we're going to have a busy morning this morning, is the effect of money and endorsements and what it tells us about the candidates. And there's some pretty interesting stuff out there. So hit us with, let's start off with number 1 and tell us where we're at here.
Well, there is. The reporters are starting to dig into the 30-day report that the candidates had to file 30 days in front of the election showing who their donors are. We talked about some of that last week, but as the reporters dig more and more into it, and as I take a look at the filings, there's some intriguing things in there. What you're seeing is sort of what you'd expect, but you're seeing it with big money. Bill Walker is getting a lot of his money in big donations coming from out of state. He has 3 big $100,000 donors. One's in Kansas, one's in two are in New York. One's in Kansas, 2 are in New York. That's where his $300,000 donors came from. Dunleavy isn't far behind. It depends on how you count his brother, who lives in Texas, but his brother is his biggest donor, who lives in Texas. Another of his big donors lives in Minnesota, who the governor describes as a hunting and fishing buddy. $100,000 from his hunting and fishing buddy. I wish I had buddies like that.
Man, I wish. Hey, Brad, I need a buddy like that. Let me know, okay?
And but the third is from in-state, Bob Penny, the Kenai Sports Fishermen's Association, and so at least Dunleavy has some of his one of his big donors coming from in-state. Les Guerra has 2 smaller big donors, just over 10,000. Both of them are in state, one in Juneau, one in Anchorage. Both of them are lawyers. The Fairbanks news miner, Linda Hersey, did what I thought was a really good analysis. What would the donors look like if you stripped out the big money? And it's interesting. If you take the $100,000 plus, if you take the 6-figure donations out, Guerra leads in the money, not by a lot, but he has 500 plus odd thousand ahead. Bill Walker's second, if you count just in-state money, and or you just count the take out the big donors, and Dunleavy's third. Again, the margins aren't huge, but they sort of come together. I mean, all 3 candidates come together if you take out the big money. So I think that's telling you that Guerra has more of a grassroots campaign, for good or bad. Dunleavy has somewhat of a grassroots Alaska campaign. Walker is being financed a lot by out of state people. You look at the endorsements. Walker's got a union endorsement, a couple of union endorsements. The bellwether, though, for me, in terms of endorsements, was one Walker announced this past week. Jim Jensen of Linden Transport and co-chair of the Keep Alaska Competitive campaign, someone I like to call, or I like to refer to as Mr. Top 20%. Jensen endorsed Walker. And if you look at the endorsements and the editorials that are coming out in support of Walker, they're basically who you would expect given Walker's last term. It's the top 20% who benefit by Walker using PFD cuts to finance spending. And it's the beneficiaries of government spending. Local government, Mike Navarre has endorsed him. Others in local government have endorsed him. The education community, the university community. So you're seeing that division that you would sort of expect, but it's being confirmed. The top 20% and the unions and the government beneficiaries, government spending beneficiaries, supporting Walker. Dunleavy, sort of the business community generally, a lot of top 20%ers in there, oil sort of in there, and Gara, also the education community and the government beneficiary community, but smaller donations from them and less endorsements. So the division in the governor's race is looking very. It's confirming, I guess, what your priors would be. It's confirming that Walker is sort of the top 20% candidate, is the government spending candidate, is the out of state good government candidate. Gara is more the grassroots candidate, and Dunleavy is sort of the business community candidate.
It's interesting to watch, and it's interesting to see some of the verbiage. One of the opinion pieces about this was from the Juneau Empire, some educator that threw out there, but you could already see some of the narrative shaping up here. The issue our state faces are significant with regard to education, the teacher shortage and the compounded years of defunding preschool through 12 and post-secondary education systems in Alaska. The defunding this is the narrative that they're going to run on, and this is one of the reasons why she is supporting Walker, because again, he is going to be the big government candidate who's going to pour more. You could see it's exactly what it is. We need more money for this. Who's going to support my pet project? There we go.
And you got that. You've got that side, and the title of that piece is, by the way, I'm a longtime educator and I'm supporting Walker Dragas. You've got that. You've got the big government spending crowd, and then on the other side, you've got the top 20%. You got Jim Jensen stepping in as a co-chair for Walker. The top 20% on the other side. So the funding side, the funding for this big government is the top 20%. Take it out of the PFD crowd. So it's what you would have guessed going into this from Walker's prior term. But it's being confirmed as you look through the donations, as you look through the people he's listing as co-chairs, as you look through the people who are writing op-eds in support of his campaign. It's being confirmed by that. We'll talk a little bit more about the legislative side in the second segment, but I will mention that there's the legislative side is interesting. Matt Buxton writes a blog on. Writes a blog several places, but he has a Substack blog, and he has gone through the legislative races in detail. Part one he published yesterday, which was the funding behind the Senate, analyzing the donations behind the Senate campaigns, state Senate campaigns, and the title of his is "Progressive Candidates Hold Fundraising Edge in Most Key Races for Legislature." So it's sort of confirming, sort of enforcing what you're seeing in the in the governor's race, with Guerra being getting a lot more grassroots donations, not relying on big money, but picking up grassroots donations. And you're sort of seeing that come through in the legislative races as well. I will say, conservatives, if you take money as as an indicator of support, as an indicator of election results, you shouldn't entirely. But if you do take that to some degree as an indicator, I would say that the Democrats are doing somewhat better than Republicans are.
Yeah, when you look at some of those numbers, and it is a little eye-opening for sure. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, one more thing that I think to mention on the governor's race, again, in terms of support and in terms of where this is going. Walker released a poll yesterday that's sort of worthless because it's not really taking into account ranked choice voting. But you take what you get and you spin it the way you can. Walker had a poll run, evidently, because the poll says it was prepared by Hayes Corporation for the Hayes polling for the Walker Tricus campaign. Walker released a poll, and it's an interesting poll. It shows a head-to-head between Dunleavy and Guerra, and a head-to-head between Walker. Dunleavy wins both. He beats Walker by less than he beats Guerra. He beats Guerra by more than he beats Walker, but not by much. And what that really does is I think confirm the survey that Ivan Moore did, and we talked about last week, which shows Dunleavy ahead, Guerra and Walker sort of neck and neck with whoever's going to finish fourth in the ranked choice voting becoming very significant. So it's an interesting poll from the standpoint of really confirming, I think, what we saw from Ivan last week or the week before, in terms of Walker and Guerra sort of splitting that progressive vote, and Dunleavy to some degree consolidating the conservative, at least the business conservative vote. I want to mention one thing.
Sure.
Back to the governor's race for a moment. I think it matters who finishes fourth. There is Jeff Landfield did an analysis and says, it as of this moment, it's sort of a toss up between Charlie Pierce and Chris Kirka on who's going to finish fourth. And I think it matters who finishes fourth. And here's why. I think the Charlie Pierce voters are more likely to rank Dunleavy second than the Kirka voters. I think the Kirka voters are more likely to do one and done, to vote for their candidate and then to stop marking the ballot and go home. And if Kirka finishes fourth without those second choice votes, I'm a little concerned that Dunleavy won't get to 50% after. This is based on the
right
on the Ivan Moore poll and assuming Dunleavy's ahead. But I'm a little concerned that Dunleavy doesn't get over 50% if the fourth choice candidate doesn't have a lot of, or if the fourth ranked candidate doesn't have a lot of second choice ballots for Dunleavy. And if we go to the third choice candidate, if Dunleavy doesn't get over 50% after the fourth choice, if we go to the third choice candidate, then I think you're going to have a real issue in terms of whoever's finished second, Walker or Guerra, in terms of that, the second choice is off that ballot, pushing them over the top. So unlike some who are saying, yeah, it really doesn't matter who finishes fourth. I think it matters a lot, frankly, who finishes fourth. If you think about it in terms of, is that fourth ranked candidate gonna have voters who go down the ballot and pick a second choice?
Right. No, and I agree. I think that his voters, Kirka's voters, are much more likely to basically be all in on one with no secondary ranking. I think that I would agree that Charlie's voters would have more of a propensity to rank the red, so to speak, in that race. I myself will be ranking red and yellow for the whole race at this point. So I'll be doing some write-ins more than anything else. I'm definitely not ranking anything on the Democratic ticket as far as that goes. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you because, and this is what Fred Van Bennekom said to us, Dr. Van Bennekom, of course, who's the expert from the Gladwell. No, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the institute. Anyway, he said that number two is that is really where the race breaks down into is who are you voting for in number two, because they have a tendency to more than likely be the candidate in the end. And in fact, there were Republicans who were running together basically in combination for various seats that were saying, no matter what you do, pick us for number one or pick us for number two. Even if you don't like us, pick us for number two, because they saw that there was power in that. So this whole thing is a mess, but it's hard to analyze because we have no real way of knowing and no real track record. But I agree. I think that fourth place is going to be very important. Now, my fingers are crossed that Charlie gets across the line into the fourth place. We'll see, because really it is. it's going to be him and Kirka. I think at this point they're the only two that have the amount of support possible to get into that position. But I don't know. Quick thoughts on who you think who's going to make it.
Well, I hope it's Charlie too. I mean, Walker as governor again, I think is a disaster. Les would be interesting, but I think of the three, I think Dunleavy's probably the best. But Kirk is just throwing so many flames out there.
Oh yeah,
at everybody. I think he's telling us that he's not going to support a second choice candidate. It's going to be all in for him. And I think that he's going to his supporters will tend to follow that as well.
Brad Keithley's our guest, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Brad, give us a tease into number two now before we jump into the break a little early.
Well, Michael, I'm starting to track legislative races, starting to think about legislative races more deeply, and I've picked five. At least at this point, I've picked five that I think are sort of the bellwether races. And I've sort of picked them out of certain categories. And so we're going to talk about those, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the money that's showing up in the legislative races that based on the analysis that Matt Buxton did.
All right, Brad, number two, the top five or so candidates races that you are really watching in this election. Of course, we know that the legislative races, 59 of those races are up, 59 out of 60 are up. But we know that at this point, the primary really for 58 of those 59 means nothing. It's essentially a fancy and expensive poll to kind of test the waters to see where people are. I guess it will give the candidates some data to know where they may need to work on things. But really, essentially, they're all in because of the ranked choice voting. It's always the top four, and only 1 out of 59 races has more than 4 candidates. So everybody's going through for the most part. But let's get started here on your top five and what the money means and the fundraising and all that other kind of stuff. Let's fold it all together.
Well, it's the top 5 races, and I've sort of picked them from categories, from 5 categories. The first category is pro-PFD Republicans against top 20% Republicans. And that shows up in a lot of races. It shows up in Roger Holland, Senator Holland versus Kathy Giessel, the rematch there. Holland, a pro-PFD, Giessel, a top 20%er. Shows up in the Shower race, Shower versus Massey. Again, Massey, we've talked about this on our previous program. Massey, clearly a top 20% pick to go in and try to take out Shower. Shower, a firm pro-PFD candidate. Shows up in Verhagen Bishop. Elijah Verhagen being a pro-PFD candidate. Click Bishop being clearly a top 20% Republican. The one that I've picked in that category to follow closely is the Ken McCarty Kelly Merrick Senate race in Eagle River. I picked that one because it's gonna attract a lot of money. It's Laura Reinbold's old district, so there's a question about how conservative that district's going to be. And really, I think it'll be a big player in terms of how the Senate comes out. Interestingly enough, well, not interestingly enough, predictably enough, Kelly Merrick's ahead on the money. She's got $64,000 in donations compared to Ken McCarty's $26,000. She has $48,000 remaining in the bank. McCarty has $3,000 remaining in the bank, and frankly, McCarty's in debt because his debt is higher than a higher balance than the money he has remaining. So clearly, the money is lining up. The top 20% money is lining up behind Kelly Merrick. I think that's going to be an interesting race. I think McCarty's clearly going to have a chance there because of what that district is, but that's going to show, I think, the impact of money in a state Senate race. The second category is a pro-PFD Republican against a top 20% Democrat. That I've picked. That shows up again in some races. I've picked Costello, the Mia Costello versus Matt Clayman race, Senate race in South Anchorage, West Anchorage, as sort of the bellwether for that. Mia is a pro-PFD Republican. Matt is an anti or a top 20% Democrat. And again, Clayman is ahead on money. He's raised a heck of a lot of money. Let's see, $110,000, almost $111,000 for Clayman, $14,000 for Mia. Clayman's got $79,000 remaining in the bank. Mia's got $17,000 remaining in the bank. So again, top 20% money showing up for a top 20% candidate thus far in the race. The third category, and this may be the only race in the state that's like this, a pro-PFD Democrat against you don't really know Republican, Scott Kawasaki. The race between Scott Kawasaki and Jim Matherly up in Fairbanks. Kawasaki's been a pro-PFD Democrat consistently. You look at Matherly, you don't really know what Matherly is what Matherly's position is on, frankly, much of anything. Scott's ahead in the money so far, and so that's an interesting sign. Scott's a good grassroots campaigner, a good grassroots fundraiser, and that if you're looking at this from the PFD issue as I do, that's a good sign in that race. The Democrat on Democrat, there's some Democrat on Democrat primaries. The one I've picked to look at most is pro-ish PFD Harriet Drummond versus clearly top 20% Zach Fields. Right. That also shows up in the Garantar versus Forrest Dunbar Senate race in East Anchorage. Drummond's doing okay. She's got some money so far. Fields is picking up top 20% money. I think that's going to be an interesting race as well. And then the fifth candidate is, and again, there may not be many of these, but the fifth race that I'm focusing on is again in Fairbanks, and it's a free for all. It's the Bart LeBon re-election with Kelly Nash running as a Republican and with Dilbert running as a Democrat. Clearly, Kelly Nash is a pro-PFD Republican. Dilbert's sort of in the middle, and Bart is clearly a top 20% Republican. And that's, talk about where ranked choice voting is going to play an interesting role.
Absolutely.
That race is going to be one, and I think that's going to be an interesting race as well. I haven't seen the fundraising numbers on that. I suspect Bart's going to have some pretty good top 20% money in there, but that's the fifth category that I'm looking at.
I mean, at one point, this is where the campaigns, especially in that LeBon race, the campaign slogan for Kelly Nash and company should all be, we're number two because we try harder. So make sure you vote us for number two, because I think it's going to come down to some slicing and dicing in the follow-up rounds of what's going on.
It's interesting in that race. if you look at this from the PFD, if you look at this from the fiscal issue, Nash and Dilbert are much more closely aligned than Laban is. And I would be tempted, if I were voting in that district, I would be tempted to vote Nash 1, Dilbert 2, and leave Laban off the ranking. Because when you look at it, it's odd, but when you look at it, the Democrat and the conservative Republican are much more closely aligned on that fiscal issue, preserving the PFD,
right,
than Bart Laban is. So we'll see if that starts showing up in the race as an important factor. But it's the reason I'm following it, because it's one of those few races where Democrats and conservative Republicans are more aligned than the Republican is with the top 20% Republican.
Maybe this one slipped by me and you said it, and I just was technically working on something here in the background, but the Giesel-Holland race, the money raising discrepancy there is pretty significant. Your thoughts on that?
Well, Giesel's a top 20% Republican. She's got oil money who doesn't want to see the PFD preserved. They want to see PFD cuts taken. She's got top 20% business money behind her, and Roger really hasn't raised that much, even since even as you see on the chart, even since the end of the session. But the money, Michael, the money was like that in the last race, and right. Roger beat Kathy. Now, Kathy's votes against the PFD were fresh the last race around, and they're not going to be as fresh this time. So you sort of wonder if that's going to have some impact. But money, that's why I'm following Merrick and McCarty, for example. The money's going to be huge on Merrick's side. Already you see the money heavy on Massey against Shower. You see the money heavy on Bishop against Verhagen. There's going to be money on the top 20% candidate side. I mean, they want to preserve. They want to preserve their ability to get off scot-free, right, paying for government.
But that doesn't, again, just because they have the most money doesn't mean that they're going to be the winning candidate. That's, I mean, again, the Holland and Giesel race in the past proves that, if nothing else. There's been many times when candidates have been ousted, but it just depends on how long the candidate's memories or the constituency's memories last. That's for sure.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And that's why these races are interesting to me. I mean, the Republican on Republican races are interesting to me to see if the pro PFD candidates, the more fiscally conservative candidates, can outlast or survive that money attack that we're seeing in these races.
Did you notice in Matt Buxton's article the one discussion on the fundraising about the Defend Our Constitution? Do you see what their fundraising had hit in that talk?
I don't remember the number. It was high.
$332,000 already for the Defend Our Constitution. That is the anti-con group out there. I mean, that's some significant money at this point. And a lot of those contributions coming from one or more of the unions. They definitely do not want to see the state's constitution opened up and some changes to be made. But I thought that was a little eye-opening, considering the con movement has really barely got started at this point.
Well, and if I recall that portion of the article, it also says the con money, the con or the support of Constitutional Convention has zero in terms of dollars. That there's no formal organization, that there's no PACs, there's no money that's been put into that effort. So it's 300 and whatever thousand you said to zero right now in terms of dollars. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons that people. We've talked about some of them on the show. There's a lot of reasons that people oppose opening up the special interests, government spending, those interested in government spending, those interested in preserving the PFD as a funding tool, PFD cuts as a funding tool, those interested in preserving. I mean, one of the provisions in the Constitution is guaranteeing retirement, government employee retirement above everything else. in terms of government spending. So there's a lot of reasons that those tied to current government spending and those tied to current government programs don't want to see the Constitution opened up.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was an interesting. Take because it really. I'm sorry, 320, not 332, 320,000, and this is from the Juneau Empire. But 100,000 of that comes from two out-of-state PACs: the American Federation of Teachers and the IBEW PAC Education Fund and the NEA. So, I mean, they've definitely got a skin in this game and making sure that the Constitution does not get cracked open for various reasons.
Yeah, exactly right. There's other people who subscribe. I think this is a subscription only publication by Buxton. I think this is one of his behind the curtain publications. But I mean, there's some interesting numbers in here. Gary Stevens is ahead, has $58,000 compared to Heath Smith's $24,000. But what's really interesting about that is Stevens only has $3,000 remaining. Of that $58,000, only has $3,000 remaining. Heath Smith has $7,000 remaining. So there's some that's another one of those Republican on Republican pro PFD versus top 20% candidates. There's a lot of interesting. There's going to be a lot of interesting races in here. I don't think the money is finalized yet by any stretch of the imagination, but as Matt says at the headline, progressives are running ahead so far. Generally speaking, progressives and what he calls moderate Republicans, what I call top 20% Republicans, are sort of uniformly running ahead. One exception to that, Tuckerman is ahead of Jesse Bjorkman by quite a bit. Tuckerman has $78,000 raised to Jesse's $21,000,
and he
has $32,000 remaining against Jesse's $13,000,
earning the severe disdain of Matt Buxton and the excoriation of Matt Buxton for how dare they. Yeah, I mean, you have to. I love to read this stuff just with a grain of salt, but definitely that's one of the bright spots in the whole thing. Is the Babcock Bjorkman race there down in the peninsula, but a lot of interesting races, Brad. I mean, and we're going to get a feel for this, especially after this upcoming election. Like I said, it's acting more like a poll than anything else. We'll get a feel for where everybody's sitting when it comes down.
It is, and as I say, I'm going to be looking at it through these 5 categories: Republicans on Republicans, pro PFD Democrats against top 20% Republicans, and so forth. I think that's really, to me, that's the way to really sort of grab hold of the dynamics that are going on in the race.
Yeah, absolutely. We can move on to number 3, which is Alaska's place in the oil world. What does it mean? Where are we gonna? What is our place gonna? How are we gonna find this out?
Well, we've talked a lot about we've talked a lot about Willow on various programs. We've talked a lot about last week we talked about the Wood Mackenzie report that said Alaska was a disadvantaged basin because of the environmental issues associated with production there, or the carbon issues associated with production there. And we've talked a little bit about PICA, but we're sort of coming up on a real world test of how investors feel about Alaska, about investing in additional production in Alaska. Santos Oil Search, before Santos, has gotten PICA to the point where it's ready to go. It's gotten all the permits, all of the approvals that PICA needs in order to be able to go forward on phase 1 of the PICA project. Big phase 1, 80,000 barrels a day is the estimate of phase 1 production. They've gotten it all sort of street ready or shovel ready, to use the term, to go forward. The question now is financing. Santos Oil Search before them, and now Santos has said they're going to make an FID decision, final investment decision. That's what FID stands for, final investment decision, on phase 1 mid-year. Well, we're in July. and Santos just released its second quarter corporate report, and they reaffirmed that they're looking at mid-year 2022 to make a decision on going forward on phase one. So, assuming mid-year means sometime by September, sometime by the beginning of the third quarter, or by late September, we're coming up on that decision of whether or not Santos is going to make the investment decision. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about Santos having Pikka out for sale, at least a portion of Pikka out for sale, wanting to get to spread the risk, wanting to mitigate their risk, and get a little bit of cash up front by selling an interest in the Pikka field. We've heard those rumors for a long time. We know that Santos has had a data room open in Australia, that people have visited it. We're going to find out, I think, in the next couple of months how real this project is and how willing Santos is, either on its own or positioned with somebody else going forward on that project. And I think that's a real world test of where Alaska's oil investment and oil production future lies.
All right. Well, we'll keep our ear to the ground and our eyes to the sky. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you coming in and joining us.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me. Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the weekly top three from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages. And keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week on the weekly top three.